just coming from a rainstorm actually out there in the garden. One minute it's blinding sunshine, then it's pouring with rain, and I've just discovered that pigeons have made a nest in the most inappropriate place in our garden. They keep flying in with these whopping great twigs. And yes, it's like a porch thing that we've got, but we tend to put chairs and things in there and sit in there occasionally. And I think if they're going to lay their eggs and have babies, it's going to be covered in pigeon poo before we know it. So not quite sure what to do about it at the minute. So I shall leave all that and I shall crack on with our story instead. Part 2 of a chapter of accidents that was written by Geoffrey Archer and is part of this lovely collection called A Twist in the Tale. You might remember Caroline and Edward are married. They go skiing most years to Verbier, and they meet one year a man called Patrick Travers, who turns out to be a really nasty piece of work. So Edward has plans and they return to Verbier the following year. So this is part 2 of that story. I hope you're going to enjoy it. Having arrived in Verbier, the night before Travers was due to arrive, I was the last person to leave the slopes. Even Caroline commented on how much my skiing had improved, and she suggested to her trainer Marcel that I was ready for the A slope with its sharper bends and steeper inclines. Next year, perhaps, I told her, trying to make light of it, and returned to the B slope. During the final morning, I skied over the first mile of the course again and again, and I became so preoccupied with my work that I quite forgot to join Caroline for lunch. In the afternoon, I checked and rechecked the placing of every red flag marking the run, and once I was convinced the last skier had left the slope for the evening, I collected about 30 of the flags and I replaced them at intervals that I'd carefully worked out. My final task was to check the prepared patch before building a large mound of snow some 20 paces above the chosen spot. Once my preparations were complete, I skied slowly down the mountain in the fading light. "Are you trying to win an Olympic gold medal or something?" Caroline asked me when I eventually got back to our room. I closed the bathroom door so she couldn't expect a reply. Travers checked into the hotel an hour later. I waited until the early evening before I joined him at the bar for a drink. He seemed a little nervous when he first saw me, but I quickly put him at ease. His old self-confidence soon returned, which only made me more determined to carry out my plan. I left him at the bar a few minutes before Caroline came down for dinner, so that she would not see the two of us together. Innocent surprise would be necessary once the deed had been done. I made no comment as we passed Travers seated at the bar, his hand on the knee of another innocent middle-aged woman. I did not sleep for 1 second that night, and I crept out of bed just before 6 the next morning, careful not to wake Caroline. Everything was laid out on the bathroom floor just as I had left it the night before. A few moments later I was dressed and ready. I walked down the back stairs of the hotel, avoiding the lift, and I crept out by the fire exit, realising for the first time what a thief must feel like. I had a woolen cap pulled well down over my ears and a pair of snow goggles covering my eyes. Not even Caroline would have recognised me. I arrived at the bottom of the ski lift. I realised that everything now depended on Travers sticking to his routine. I wasn't sure I could go through with it if my plan had to be moved to the following day. As I waited, I stamped my feet in the freshly fallen snow and I slapped my arms around my chest to keep warm. At last a speck appeared at the bottom of the hill by the side of the road, a pair of skis resting on a man's shoulders. But what if it wasn't Travers? But it was, and he couldn't hide his surprise at seeing me standing there. I started up a casual conversation about being unable to sleep and how I thought I might as well put in a few runs before the rush began. Now all I needed was the ski lift to start on time. A few minutes after 7, an engineer arrived, and the vast oily mechanism cranked into action. We were the first two to take our places on those little seats before heading up and over the deep ravine. I kept turning back to check that there was still no one else in sight. "I usually manage to complete a full run even before the second person arrives," Travers told me before the lift had reached its highest point. I wished I hadn't looked down, but the ski lift jerked slowly up on the icy wire until we finally reached the landing point. "Damn," I said as we jumped off our little seats. "Marcel, the instructor, isn't here." "Never is at this time," said Travers, making off towards the advanced slope. "Far too early for him." "I don't suppose you'd come down with me," I said, calling after Travers. He stopped and looked back suspiciously. "Caroline thinks I'm ready to join you," I explained. "But I'm not so sure, and I'd value a second opinion. I've broken my own record for the B slope several times, but I wouldn't want to make a fool of myself in front of my wife." "Well, I'd ask Marcel if he were here, and in any case you're the best skier I know." "Well, if you—" he began. "Just the once, then you can spend the rest of your holiday on the A slope. You could even treat the run as a warm-up." Might make a change, I suppose, he said. Just the once, I repeated. That's all I need. Then you'll be able to tell me if I'm good enough. Well, shall we make a race of it, he said, taking me by surprise as I began clamping on my skis. I couldn't complain. All the books on murder had warned me to be prepared for the unexpected. That's one way we can find out if you're ready, he added cockily. If you insist. Don't forget, though, I'm older and less experienced than you, I reminded him. I checked my skis quickly because I knew I had to start off in front of him. But you know the B course backwards, he retorted. I've never even seen it before. I'll agree to a race, but only if you'll consider a wager, I replied. For the first time I could see I'd caught his interest. How much, he asked. Oh, nothing as vulgar as money, I said. The winner gets to tell Caroline the truth. The truth, he said, looking puzzled. Yes, I replied, and shot off down the hill before he could respond. I got a good start as I skied in and out of the red flags, but looking back over my shoulder I could see he had recovered quickly and was already chasing hard after me. I realised also it was vital for me to stay in front of him for the first third of the course, but I could already feel him cutting down my lead. After half a mile of swerving and driving, he shouted, "You're going to have to go a lot faster than this if you hope to beat me." His arrogant boast only pushed me to stay ahead, but I kept the lead because of my advantage of knowing every twist and turn during that first mile. Once I was sure that I could reach the vital newly marked route before he began, I started to relax. After all, I'd practiced over the next 200 metres 50 times a day for the last 10 days, but I was only too aware that this time was the only one that mattered. I glanced over my shoulder to see how he was now 30 metres behind me. I began to slow slightly as we approached the prepared ice patch, hoping he wouldn't notice, or he would think that I'd lost my nerve. I held back even more when I reached the top of the patch, until I could almost feel the sound of his breathing. And then, quite suddenly, the moment before I would have hit the ice, I ploughed my skis and I came to a complete halt in the mound of snow that I had built the night before. Travers sailed past me at about 40 miles an hour and seconds later flew high into the air over the ravine with a scream that I will never forget. I couldn't get myself to look over the edge as I knew he must have broken every bone in his body the moment he hit the snow some 100 feet below. I carefully levelled the mound of snow that had saved my life and then clambered back up the mountain as fast as I could, gathering the 30 flags that heralded my false route. Then I skied from side to side, replacing them in their correct positions on the B slope, some 100 metres above my carefully prepared ice patch. Once each one was back in place, I skied on down the hill, feeling like an Olympic champion. When I reached the base of the slope, I pulled up my hood to cover my head and I didn't remove my snow goggles. Unstrapping my skis, I walked casually towards the hotel. I tried to control my breathing, but it was some time before my pulse returned to normal. Caroline woke a few minutes later and turned over, putting her arms around me. "Gosh," she said, "you're frozen. Have you been sleeping without the covers on?" I laughed. "I must have pulled them off during the night." "Go and have a hot bath," she said. After I had a quick bath, we made love, and then I dressed a second time, double-checking that I had left no clues of my early flight before going down for breakfast. As Caroline was pouring my second cup of coffee, I heard the ambulance siren, at first coming from the town, then later returning. "I hope it wasn't a bad accident," my wife said. "What?" I said, a little too loudly, glancing up from the previous day's Times. "The siren, silly. There must have been an accident on the mountain." "Probably Travers," she said. "Travers?" I said even more loudly. "Patrick Travers. I saw him at the bar last night. I didn't mention it to you because I know you don't care for him." "But why Travers?" I asked nervously. "Doesn't he always claim he's the first on the slope every morning? Even beats the instructors up to the top." "Does he?" I said. "You must remember. We were going up for the first time the day we met him when he was already on his third run." "Was he?" "You are being dim this morning, Edward. Did you get out of bed the wrong side?" she asked, laughing. I didn't reply. "Well, I only hope it is Travers," Caroline said, sipping her coffee. "I never did like the man." "Why not?" I asked, somewhat taken aback. "He once made a pass at me," she said casually. I stared across at her, unable to speak. "Aren't you going to ask what happened?" "I'm so stunned I don't know what to say," I replied. "He was all over me at the gallery that night, and then he invited me out to lunch after we had dinner with him. I told him to get lost," Caroline said. She touched me gently on the hand. "I've never mentioned it to you because I thought it might have been the reason he returned to the Wheelard. and that only made me feel guilty. But it's me who should feel guilty, I said, fumbling with a piece of toast. Oh no, darling, you've got nothing to be guilty about. In any case, if I ever decided to be unfaithful, it wouldn't be with a lounge lizard like him. Good heavens, no. Diana had already warned me about him. I sat there thinking of Travers on his way to the morgue, or even worse, still buried under the snow, knowing there was nothing I could do about it. You know, I think the time really has come for you to tackle the A-slope, Caroline said. Your skiing has improved beyond words. Yes, I replied, more than a little preoccupied. I hardly spoke another word as we made our way together to the foot of the mountain. Are you all right? Caroline asked. I'm fine. Stop looking down, she said. You look like a frightened child. I smiled weakly, and as I stepped off the ski lift, I sprained my ankle. I received no sympathy from Caroline. She was convinced I was putting it on in order to avoid attempting the advanced run. She swept past me and sped on down the mountain while I returned towards the lift. I hobbled over to the first aid post and checked in. Caroline joined me a few minutes later. I told her that the duty orderly thought it might be a fracture and had been suggested that I report to the hospital immediately. Caroline was not happy. I'm going to be able to dine out on this for about a year, she promised as we entered the double doors of the hospital. This way to the X-ray room, said the male orderly. The room was full of sophisticated machinery, presiding over by an expensively dressed doctor. I told him what I thought was wrong, and he lifted the offending foot gently up to an X-ray machine. Moments later, he was studying the large negative. There's no fracture there, he assured me. But if you are still in pain, it might be wise to bind the ankle tightly. The doctor then pinned my X-ray up next to 5 others hanging from a rail. Gosh, am I the 6th person in today? I asked, looking up at the row of X-rays. No, he said, laughing. The other 5 are all the same man. I think he must have tried to fly over the ravine. Over the ravine? Yes, showing off, I expect, he said, as he began to bind my ankle. We get one every year, but this poor fellow broke both his arms and his leg, and will have a nasty scar on his face to remind him of stupidity. Lucky to be alive, in my opinion. Lucky to be alive? I repeated weakly. Yes, but only because he didn't know what he was doing. My 14-year-old skis over that ravine, and he can land like a seagull on water. He, on the other hand, said the doctor, pointing to the X-rays, will not be skiing again this holiday. In fact, he won't be walking for at least 12 months. Really? I said. And as for you, he added after he finished binding me up, just rest the ankle in ice every 3 hours and change the bandage once a day. You should be back on the slopes again in a couple of days, 3 at the most. We're flying home this evening, I told him as I gingerly got to my feet. Good timing, he said, smiling. I hobbled happily out of the X-ray room to find Caroline head down in a copy of Vogue. You look pleased with yourself, she said, looking up. I am. It turns out to be nothing more bad than 2 broken arms, a broken leg and a scar on the face. How stupid of me, said Caroline. I thought it was a simple sprain. Not me, I told her. Travers. The accident. This morning, do you remember? The ambulance? Still, they assure me he'll live, I added. Pity, she said, linking her arm through mine. After all the trouble you took, I was rather hoping you'd succeed. It's good, isn't it? I hope you enjoyed that one. I'm going to have to try and find a different author for us next week and get you another short story as well. But in the meantime, stay well, enjoy the remainder of the weekend. Do keep in touch. I'm with you, it's going to be tomorrow evening, Sunday evening, so I shall look forward to that very much indeed. But do keep in touch, Instagram, Facebook, all the other ways. And if you do write on the blog, because I put a new one up last week, I'm spending this weekend, the remainder of it, replying to those comments. It's always nice to hear from you. Anyway, take care. I better go and sort out Pigeon Gate, I think. But I'll see you next Saturday.